Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing. Hi, Adam. It's great to have you back again today. Thank you for coming on again. For people who don't know you, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me back. My name is Adam Gowland. I am a freelance local authority commissioner, and I also do consultancy work for developers and investors.
And you also invest yourself as
I
well.
do also invest. Sorry, yeah, that's an important part that I missed off for this podcast. Yeah, so I invest. I've got a small portfolio of single lets and some flats, mainly for supported living and specialist housing.
So we've done an episode before about talking about the challenges of working with commissioners and how to work with commissioners. And so if you haven't listened to that, do go and find that episode because it's a really useful episode if you're interested in this space. But today we're looking at the challenges that property investors are facing and how property investors work in supported living. So what's been your experience, Adam?
Um, excuse me. I think, like we discussed last time, I think the real challenge for new investors and developers is entry into the market. So I think knowing where to start is the point where most investors, developers struggle. One of the things that I see when I'm working in local authorities is a lot of approaches from different people that have got good skill sets, great development expertise in different areas, and they want to get into the world of supported living and specialist housing. But it's just not a clear or well articulated model for people sometimes. And I think sometimes they look for advice and support in areas where they might not get the skill and expertise to kind of help them build out their development or enter this kind of new world really and understand a bit more about how everything works. So I think one of the main challenges is around access and local authorities. And I think one of the kind of big disconnects that developers really struggle with is the national narrative around the fact that we do need so much more supported living or specialist housing. But it just doesn't always tally with the way that local authorities are set up or they articulate some of those things. Um, so, if, for example, there's a document or a market position statement in a local authority that says we need, 150 or 200 units for these type of people and these type of properties over the course of the next 5 years. But you try and make contact with the local authorities and they're met with a kind of stony silence or a lack of direction or not very clear direction around what it is that you'd need to do to access speaking to somebody about what you might do. It is incredibly frustrating. Um,
You're
so
talking about the situations we have where we've got developers with a great property or a site that could be developed into like the perfect property. It fits what it says in the market position statement,
yeah,
but then they're banging on doors and no one's answering those doors. They can't get anyone to pick up the phone. They can't get through to speak to anybody.
I think that's it. And I think when developers compare the experience of working with local authorities versus the experience of developing something out in the private market, sometimes it is the path of least resistance to go and do something slightly different, or if they go away and build a relationship with a housing provider or a care provider, it might sometimes be an easier way in. So I think because of the work that I do with different local authorities, it is really easy to see where they don't line up. So I think authorities that understand what developers need to know at the outset and are set up to be commercially attractive for developers have a much greater chance of success. So because I move around a lot, I could probably name 5 or 6 different local authorities that will say to a developer, right, here are our minimum service specification standards. Here are the parts of our borough where we would like to have something built. Here are the types of units that we would like to have. This is what you do when you want to test your rents with our housing benefit team. Here is how you need to work with us around building control, sign off, having our brokerage teams out to look at your building. Here are the type of tenants that we would have in your building. We can guarantee that because of the tenant group and the client group, it will be classified as exempt accommodation. If you still want to develop out with us, great. We'll come out and help you. If you don't, that's fine.
Amazing. That sounds like a dream list for most developers, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
so I
To
think
get that.
it's I think there's a duty on local authorities to kind of make people to make themselves more accessible for developers. And there's obviously kind of the kind of statutory responsibilities under the Care Act to make accommodation available and to have some kind of a choice for people as well. So I think the reality at the moment is because it's so difficult to invest with local authorities sometimes, the reality is a lot of people don't have choice and control over where they live. And quite often it will be this is what is available for you, whether it's a shared property or self-contained flats or some kind of accommodation in part of a borough or a ward where you wouldn't necessarily particularly want to live. It's not close to friends or family. I don't think a lot of local authorities are kind of close to fulfilling some of the statutory duties there. Some are, some do it very well. So I do think it's kind of incumbent on local authorities to do that bit well and to kind of, we have open forums for care providers. We speak to care providers all the time about the type of care and support that we need. It would be helpful, I think, for authorities and developers to do it for developers and just to sit them
Mm.
down and say, this is the process that you would need to follow. These are the things that we're looking for. Um, I obviously kind of wear two hats because I'm a commissioner and an investor at the same time, but I have exactly the same experience as other developers investing in other local authority areas. It's no different for me. And even if I tell people that I'm a commissioner and I understand how the process works, it still doesn't necessarily compute. So
So
I
I guess
think,
that's reassuring for people listening that it's not necessarily that they're doing something wrong. It's just the way the system is stacked at the moment.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And it's not the same. There's nothing uniform about investing in different parts of the country.
No.
And sometimes you get commissioners that have got adult social care backgrounds but no knowledge of housing. And that can be difficult because they came into commissioning for different reasons, and they picked up the housing portfolio, and all of a sudden they've got to learn this whole new model of supported living and how the whole thing works. Whereas sometimes you'll go, developers will approach our local authority, and it won't be a commissioner; it'll be someone that's got a housing background who might have a background working for a registered provider or has done previous developments. So the discussion for a developer to someone with a housing background is usually much easier
Mm.
because
Mm.
they'll be au fait with, development standards and regulations and other things that a commissioner might not necessarily consider. So I think I think that access point is crucial. Um, I think in terms of the type of property that people want to deliver as well, there's a lot of barriers sometimes when it comes to innovating or doing something slightly different. So I think for people looking to do things like micro homes or very small self-contained units that are somewhere between 20 to 25 square meters, and there's quite a lot of new sites like that dotted around the country that have been set up predominantly for people that are either leaving care or a single homeless people that need somewhere to live. Planners don't like them in some areas because they don't meet national space standards. But the kind of counter argument that a lot of developers make, which I think is valid, is that, well, they would either be in a hostel where they're on license and they're back in and out again, or they would be in a HMO where it's not always difficult for people to live compatibly with everyone else as a result of some of the challenges that they've got. Why not produce some small pods on land that would not otherwise be used for anything? So a lot of, I did some work in Bristol a little while ago. There's some lovely little schemes that people have developed on the side of gorges or car parks where they're making use of space that wouldn't necessarily be used for anything else usually, and people are trying to be creative around giving people homes and solutions to problems that they've not had access to previously. And sometimes planners just won't go for them because they don't look like the type of building that they would usually see. So I think if people are kind of changing and responding to market demand and they're trying to use more creative options about, you know, homes that give people better outcomes or let them move on to kind of general needs housing, that can be really frustrating.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
because they're not significantly expensive, those units, and they can be put up quite quickly because a lot of them are a modern method of construction. They're built somewhere else and shipped on site, and
Yeah.
it can all be done within a year. And there's some lovely little schemes around
And
different
also,
parts
I'm
of the
on the
UK.
micro homes front. If you actually put a young person who's transitioning from care, or, you're going to dump a 17-year-old into a 40-meter squared one bed flat, that's a lot of space to suddenly be responsible for and to have to keep clean and tidy. Actually, it's a lot, isn't it? And actually, there's a lot of advantages to saying, well, this is your little studio, this is your space. It feels a bit more secure to start with, doesn't it, for a lot of people? You don't
I think that's
necessarily.
it. And it's, I think if you're giving someone a secure home for the first time, or if they've had a secure home and they're kind of reaching that point of transition where they're kind of moving towards adulthood and it's
Mm,
a real difficult time in your life and you're still forming your opinions about who you are and
mm,
you've had a difficult start and you're trying to find your way in the world, I think having something that you can call your own is really important. And the other thing is, I think particularly in boroughs where land is very expensive, um, what other solution is there
mm,
other than saying go out into the private market or go into a kind of transitional accommodation setting where it might not be best for you.
mm.
So I think something that allows people to live independently with the level of support that they need is really important. So
And going for those smaller units as well is a way to try and keep rents slightly more affordable as well, isn't it? If you're having to
It
go
is
for a
so.
40-meter squared flat, you're going
Yeah,
to only get, one of those in, where you might get two micro flats in.
yeah. I think in the micro home space as well. I think there are a lot of um, there are quite a lot of grants that people can access. You
Mm.
do find a lot of. I think you find quite a lot of generous philanthropy as well in the micro home spaces. There are people that want it to succeed.
Mm.
You find people doing pro bono work, whether it's legal, project management, those kind of things. So I think given all that and the fact that rents, like you said, don't tend to be too high. I mean, in some places they'll just do local housing allowance rates, or they'll find
Mm.
somewhere between LHA and exempt accommodation rates. I think those things are very viable solutions for people in some places. And again, it's a really good use of space that would
But it
otherwise.
highlights that mismatch between planning and maybe what the local commissioning team want or what is needed by the providers on the ground, doesn't it? And that's the challenge for developers and investors in this space.
I agree.
Yeah. I was expecting you to go on another, but yeah, there is. It's a real issue around planning, and that's something that might change under SHROA, the Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act. It's being looked at, isn't it, at the moment? Whether it will or not, we don't know at this stage, but yeah, it might do, mightn't it? What other, from your experience of being an investor, what like when you started investing in this space, were you surprised by some of the challenges that you had? Were you thrown things you weren't expecting to come across?
Um, I guess there's an advantage in knowing how it works and having seen lots of different deals previously. And I don't think there were a huge amount of surprises in terms of how things worked, but the lack of speed still frustrates me around a lot of even on things that you would consider relatively straightforward. Um, One thing that I found more recently is that I do think there's a general feeling amongst investors that things feel harder at the moment, and I think that's a combination of things in that, particularly in specialist housing. I think more and more people are looking for the same type of properties. So everybody wants a bungalow, everybody wants self-contained flats. So there's a demand profile for those that's pushing up the price in lots of different areas.
Well, the price of actually buying the
The
property
price of actually
to
buying it,
start
yeah,
with. Yeah.
yeah. I think the other pressure at the moment is probably the kind of cost pressure around construction inflation and additional costs going up. And I think sometimes it feels like housing benefit teams are trying to tighten the belts on certain rents, which is fine. They need to be scrutinised, but I think that sometimes where there's a kind of anticipated range of housing benefit payments in certain areas for certain types of building, there's a kind of tendency to benchmark against those rather than against particular schemes. So some of the investments I found that the rents are starting to be squeezed, and the yield gets squeezed. But I think the challenge around that is that things are going up. There's no kind of artificial inflation of costs. It's just a fair reflection of everything that needs to go in. Um, I tend to work through registered providers that already have relationships with local authorities. So again, they've got pre-existing relationships. So I don't deal significantly with other commissioners in other areas. Um, if other people have got the relationships, I'd probably see that as a more efficient use of time. Um, Planning is slower again, mainly due to capacity, I think. I don't tend to do a significant amount of planning on some of my buildings, but that's an issue that's slowing things down. Um, there is a tendency, I think, when you're doing investments for things to go very slow at the beginning. So in terms of doing your nomination and void agreements and your lease negotiations, I would like that to go a bit faster sometimes at the beginning because it's the security that people need to complete a purchase and to
Very
eventually.
rarely do you get that pre-purchase, do you, in
No,
reality?
no.
And I
I,
think
I
I think new developers into this space expect that you're going to have that and that it's all going to be signed and solid and on your completion you'll know exactly what you're going to get rent wise. In reality, as the developer, you have to take a bit of a risk in there, is my experience. Otherwise, nothing gets over the line. But what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's the same. I mean, I think on bigger investments, again, from a commissioning point of view, I like to give everything up front. So we've got an SLA, we've got nomination and void agreements. I can't comment on the rent, that's not my business.
No.
But at the outset of the investment, they know the terms of engagement that are going to be there all the way through, and the rent is the is the part of that puzzle that will follow later. If
Which
you
again, so you're a developer, you're used to working your numbers backwards, going, okay, right, fine. When I refinance this, I know I'm going to get net this much money a month. It's worth me doing this deal. It's not, well, whatever, however people work it out. So people are surprised when they come into this space when they can't, when you as the commissioner can't just go, yeah, okay, your rent is definitely going to be this much money a month, you know. And people get really shocked by that, don't they? Because they expect that's what's going to be there.
Yeah, and then you end up in a long conversation about housing benefit and the DWP and reclaimable subsidy and how the whole thing works. So I think it is difficult. There are some smaller housing providers that will be able to give you an indicative rent based on discussions that they have with local authorities. So you can't always do that with some of the bigger schemes, but if you're doing things that are individual and bespoke, and there's going to be, a significant amount of inward investment, or that property has to be tailored to an individual needs, you need to know that whatever you put into that building is going to be reflected back. Because if you make, you can always revert back to a property that you could use on the general market, or, for housing benefit reasons, they might want you to knock a three-bedroom bungalow into two,
Yeah.
and have one room for, I don't know, for a sensory room, for example, and the other one for living, and then a small office space, and then there's no spare bedroom tax or anything like that. So it's good housing providers that understand housing benefit legislation will help you through those things. Um, yeah, those. I mean, it's the challenges that it's the speed. If you're picking something for someone individual, you're usually getting something off the open market. So if you can't get terms agreed quickly, you run the risk of losing the property. Um, Sometimes, if you've got something off market, or if it's a complete wreck and there's a limited number of buyers, then it's okay. But if someone wants a move-in bungalow in 6 or 7 weeks and they need to transfer out of hospital or another property, then the whole thing has to move quickly, and sometimes it just doesn't. That's the nature
No,
of the
no.
beast. So yeah, I think unrealistic expectations sometimes are a bit of a challenge around timeframes.
On whose side when you're saying unrealistic expectations there?
I think sometimes from the care side. So I think when, again, it's from people who don't necessarily have the experience of understanding how slow property can go sometimes.
Mm,
So if you've managed to source a property and everyone's happy with it, I think sometimes there's a tendency for people to want to kind of click the fingers and go, right, we'll do the transfer, but the conveyancing is taking a lot longer than it used to. Sometimes there's surprises that come back on reports, or there's additional work that needs doing. And then sometimes even if you do expedite all those things, there can be a difficulty of transfer from people from hospital to home or from one home to another. So I think I think it's the lack of certainty that some developers struggle with. If you're speaking to a developer or an investor that's just going to invest into something solid where they understand the local rental market, for example, and there's a good return that's going to happen. In supported living, there's a lot more questions and a lot more moving bits, and probably a lack of certainty around what waits for you at the end in terms of your return. So I think that's part of the challenge sometimes, and it's worth reminding ourselves, I think, just how niche it is, because
yeah.
if we talk about these things all day, every day, there's just a natural tendency to think that it's easy to understand, or other people will grasp it. And it really isn't easy to understand if you look at it objectively and take a step back for a moment. So, yeah, the regular challenges: planning,
It's,
finance.
I think the other challenge
Development.
I would say that you encounter when you're working with providers and care organizations is the changing specifications. I don't know if you've come across that a lot.
Yeah, that's on my list. I forgot about that. So it's the change in specification after you've agreed the specification. Then it's usually something substantial to do with the fabric of the building that you find out about 3 months after you've begun all
Can
your
we?
work.
I had a conversation with a care provider the other day. Can we just move this wall a meter and a half? Well, no, not really. We just plastered it and done all the infrared heating in the ceiling, so the whole wiring plan would have to be redone. Oh, we just want to put the bigger bath in.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's really difficult because I think like I mentioned before, that I do some consultancy for developers, and a lot of the developers that I work with are building out of the ground, which makes things easier because you can design to specification. But sometimes what I'll advise developers to do is to cost up something on the basis of providing a shell for a local commissioner of 4 or 5 self-contained flats, for example, and we just invite the brokerage team round and the commissioners and just say, right, this is what the building looks like now. Have you got people in mind that you would like to live here? What would you like to see in there? So, you can future-proof your building to some degree. You can make
Mm,
sure that it's track hoisted all the way through. It's DDA compliant. Your light switches are at a certain height. You've got rise and fall kitchens. But it's really nice to be told sometimes what people want to have. Because you can do a kind of generic um, specification that would be suitable for most people that access
mm,
supported living. But the whole point of it is that it is it is personalised.
Mm.
And it's much easier to do that if you're investing and you're just buying a single bungalow or some flats that you can change. It's much harder to do that if you're trying to do things around specification changes. And I know people that invest in children's homes, and it seems to be rife in that you agree something, and then 3 or 4 months later, it's can we put this camera system in and link it to the so many cameras all around the building? Can we do certain things wired to the mains?
Yeah.
And it's all been done and it's all been
Yeah.
spec'd out. And it sometimes it doesn't matter how many times you go back. Other things other things come out. And again, I think this is why it's really important to understand how local authorities work. So when your commissioner says yes to something, that's sometimes just your commissioner saying, yes, I agree that there is demand in the area for this type of property. In a good local authority, they'll say, yes, I agree this demand exists, but I'll have my OT and physio teams and my care management teams come round and take a look quickly. And then we'll sit down and run through everything with a fine-tooth comb about what's going to be in here. Or sometimes you might get someone from building control who'll sit down and say, these are the things that we absolutely definitely need to see, and we're
Mm.
not going to change our mind after this. And that's every developer's dream, but it doesn't always work out like that. So, there are kind of adaptations that are made if tenants move out, and that's fine.
Mm.
Um, but I think in terms of, specking a building out, and particularly if you're kind of putting a lot of things in on the first fix, it's really nice to know what it is that people want. So yeah, shifting goalposts is a real challenge, I think, with local authorities sometimes.
We've talked a lot about all the negatives, and obviously, if it was all negative, you and I wouldn't be doing this and doing the work that we do. So why should people be investing in this space, Adam? What are the good things about it? I think if you're still listening and we've not put you off completely by this point, you've not run away sobbing into a corner. Why would you be investing in this space?
Personally, it's the reward about getting it right for people. So I think if you understand the challenges that certain individual people face, getting a building right and getting somebody access to something that they've been waiting for a very, very long time is a good feeling. Um, and it's also a real solid investment. So if you're creating a home for life and you've made it the way somebody likes it, if they're going to live there for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, forever, um, you're giving someone an actual home. And I think people get so used to I do think there's been a kind of culture of kind of substandard accommodation for people with additional needs. And I think particularly in the kind of late 80s, early 90s where people were moving people out of hospital, and usually it was into kind of old local authority stock that wasn't particularly fantastic, not in great areas,
Mm.
not designed in a way that meant they could live well. Um, to kind of modify a home and to get it right, or to do something where you can look at people and think, right, they can be happy here. And
Mm.
sometimes that's important, the family can look at it and we can be happy here. I think that's really important. There are a lot of people still living at home with parents who who have been at home for a long time, and the parents have probably struggled to kind of conceptualize how they might live independently, and now they're getting to an age where they think we have to kind of do something
Mm.
for our son or daughter in terms of making sure that they've got somewhere safe to live. So I think there's a kind of there is a bit of a lifting of a burden on people sometimes, and it's quite nice to see when people come round and say, this is a nice space.
Yeah.
It's somewhere good to call home. It's close to where we live. We can still come and see you if we need to. You've got your own front door, but you can ring us and we can come and see you in 5, 10 minutes. And that's a massive difference from people being sent 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours away from home.
4 or 5 hours we're having at the moment. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
being in an institution, being
Mm.
somewhere that isn't making them happy, being in a building that's not designed in a way that means they can thrive, or no, not or
Mm.
being away from the network, which is having a kind of adverse impact on their outcomes and their ability to live a good life. So, despite all these challenges, like you said, it's I don't know if it's negative. I think it's just like a true reflection of some of the challenges, really. But I think there's an optimism still amongst kind of developers, investors. There always is. It's just sometimes it's just a pivot, or just adjusting to the realities of what you have to do really to get a house over the line. So it's like anything. If there's a clear goal and objective, even when it gets hard, you'll just carry on. So
Yeah.
if you've got it in your mind that you're going to turn out some good homes, make a nice investment for yourself, and turn out a good quality home, you can hand the keys over thinking, right, I've done a really good job there, and someone's happy.
Really good feeling when that happens. Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. We'll put your contact details in the show notes so people can find you if they want to. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you're finding this content useful, then maybe it's time you join the Supported Living Property Network. If you're not already a member, then let me explain what's included. The network is a unique community of property investors and providers coming together to create quality supported living homes. If you're a property investor, you can list property on our portal for our provider members to see. You can access the demand portal where our providers list where they need property, so you can buy property to order. If you're a provider, you can access the property portal to see where our members have property available for you to lease, and you can list where you need property. We do not charge any additional introduction or sourcing fees. You also get access to our monthly training sessions with industry experts to help you understand supported living property and keep up to date. You get access to our monthly online networking sessions to help you connect with property investors and providers. I've written 2 training courses, one for providers and one for property investors, to help you get started in supported living property. We have a membership area filled with resources that you need, where you can watch the previous training sessions too. You get all of this for only £47.50 plus VAT a month. And because we do not want you to stay unless you think it's incredible value, you can leave at any time. Just give us 14 days notice. Simply go to www.supportedlivingproperty.uk. That's www.supportedlivingproperty.uk to join us now.